Hi everyone, this is Michelle Grosvenor, and sorry that I missed doing my live vlog yesterday. I realised just checking that my volume was up. I realised that as the day ended that I'd forgotten to do it yesterday, my weekly one. So today I just wanted to catch up with you to talk about something that's been on my mind over the past week or so. So I've been thinking a lot about ways that we as adults can talk to children about sex and healthy relationships and consent. For me, this came up to the top of my mind because last Wednesday when I was driving to lunch with my almost 8-year-old son, we had the second stage of talks about sex. We were just, driving in the car, and he asked some fairly direct questions, and it got me thinking about how, as adults, we respond to these kind of questions. And so I thought, I also had some conversations with some other adults over the weekend about these issues and how we approach them from a perspective that provides children with age-appropriate information and helps them to learn about being able about these issues. Because I guess essentially, if we're unable to have open, sorry, I seem to have lost reception for a moment there. If we're not able to have these kind of open conversations with our children, they're going to find the information from elsewhere. So unfortunately, a lot of research is showing that by the age of 10, most children have been exposed to pornography. And that means that if we don't talk to our children early on in their lives and explain to them about sex and boundaries and healthy relationships and consent, that they might get some unhelpful messages through watching pornography. They might actually not learn about how to treat other people in a healthy and respectful way. Hi Karen, thanks for joining. And so I'm just thinking about ways to do that, and I guess one of the key ways that we can talk to children and young people about these issues is to answer their questions in a very kind of straightforward way, to not, even if we feel uncomfortable, to not give them the impression that they're doing something wrong by asking about sex, because it's natural to be curious about sex and to want to know more. But it's important that we as adults are able to answer those questions for children in a way that doesn't make them feel ashamed for asking, because otherwise they might shut down and they might not ask any questions in the future from us. They might seek information from the schoolyard, or worse still from the internet, unfortunately. And so I see it, I know some people talk about having the sex talk, but I don't think that's a helpful way to viewing it. I think it's better to think of it as being a series of talks about sex and relationships and consent that are going to sometimes be initiated by you and sometimes initiated by the child or young person at a time when a question might come up for them. And if you're able to approach it with a bit of a sense of humour and just see it as being a learning conversation, it's going to be much easier for you and for them. And so one thing is that when they ask you a question, is that it's often helpful to give them the opportunity to, to say to them, did you understand what I explained? Do you have any other questions? Because sometimes it's just the start of the conversation. The other thing that's important is to really give them permission to come back to it, to say, if at any time you've got more questions, please let me know. So one of the things that can be helpful is to start these conversations about their bodies when children are really, really little. So there's a book that I'm a big fan of called Everybody's Got a Bottom, and that book talks to children about their bodies and about how it's okay for them to decide who gets to, say, for example, hug or kiss them, that they don't have to do things they don't feel comfortable with. But it also talks about what they can do if someone touches them in a way that they don't feel comfortable, or if someone asks them to show them their private parts or vice versa. And so by reading these books to children when they're young, it opens up that conversation about how our bodies are private and how no one's allowed to touch our body without our permission. And that's a really important thing for when you're laying the foundation for talking about consent down the track with children, but also about helping them to stay safe. So the other thing that can be helpful is, especially when you're talking to maybe late primary school age children or teenagers, is to really make sure that you talk about respectful relationships. That if you're thinking about having a sexual relationship with someone, that it's important that you can actually talk to that person about sex, that you need to be able to feel comfortable enough to talk to that person about sex, about contraception, about those things, to give them that idea that's really important, that if they're going to enter that world of sexual relationships, that they actually need to be able to talk about it, that if they're not able to talk about it, it's probably a sign that they're probably not ready for it, especially, to give them that idea and to not wait until they're older to do that, to start kind of at a young age, because they are being exposed to so much, unfortunately, on the internet in some cases, depending on what restrictions you have on your internet. But even if you've got lots and lots of parental controls on, unfortunately, a lot of children are getting shown inappropriate images by other children who maybe have devices that don't have the same parental controls on them. And no parental control is foolproof as well. In terms of talking to children about consent as they get older, and for young people, one analogy that I find helpful when I'm talking about these issues, if they come up in treatment with young people, is the idea of going to someone's house. So you might be walking down the street and you see a house that looks great and you think, I'd really like to see more of that house, but you're actually not allowed to go in unless you're invited. So just because we see something we like doesn't mean it gives us the right to take what we want or to just go straight in. And I also talk to them about how sometimes we might invite people to our house for dinner, but that when someone comes over to your house for dinner, they usually stay, unless there's someone you're really close to, in the more public areas of the house, like the lounge room or maybe the kitchen or dining area. That they don't, just because you've invited them to come over to your house for dinner doesn't make it okay for them to go into your bedroom and rifle through your drawers or to take your stuff. And I think that you can make that analogy with sexual relationships as well, that there might be times where things are comfortable up to a certain point, but if someone starts to cross the line you've set, that's actually just because you've been comfortable up to that point doesn't mean you have to allow things to go further. That it's like, when someone comes to your house, you decide what areas of the house they have access to. And so for some older children and young people, that concept can make a lot of sense, because most of us know that when you're at somebody else's house, that there's some pretty clear boundaries around where you go and don't go, especially if it's someone you don't know very well. And so I think it's really important to have these conversations with young people, to let them know that it's not okay for them to touch other people's bodies without their permission, and it's not okay for people to touch their body without permission. And also for having these conversations, that the key thing I would suggest is to keep it an open dialogue, that it's not just one conversation, that it'll be a series of conversations that will change as your child or young person develops, in terms of their thinking and in terms of their understanding. They'll come back with more questions, and it can actually be quite a funny kind of process as well, because I know, as I mentioned, that my almost 8-year-old initiated a conversation with me the other day about finding out more about sex and babies and that side of things. And it was really quite a funny moment when he just looked at me in all seriousness and said, you know, Mum, I'm kind of shocked that you and Dad would do that. And so you just have to kind of have a bit of a sense of humour and to just kind of laugh and say, yeah, I guess it probably does sound a bit strange, you know, at this age. But when you're a bit older, you might understand more about this. So just encourage you to approach it with humour, with age-appropriate honesty, to see it as part of an ongoing process, and to keep it in the context of relationships, and to always, if you can, bring in something about the idea of consent, because that is so key for young people of, you know, whether it's a boy or a girl, we need to be talking to our children about these issues so that they're safe people to be around for others, but also so that they know that it's okay for them to set limits, and that even though they might feel pressure, that they don't have to always, you know, do what somebody else wants. And I think that's another part of it, is teaching our children and young people to be assertive, to let them know that it's okay, for example, if they don't want to hug Nana or an auntie or another family member, that, you know, from an early age, to give them the message that that's okay, to not make a big deal about it, because if we don't allow children to be assertive in those situations when they're younger, it gives them the message that it's not okay for them to set limits. So thanks for tuning in today, and thanks, Karen, for your comment about loving the videos. I'm glad that you're enjoying watching them. Please feel free to like, share or comment if you think this would be helpful to anyone else you know who might have children or young people. And if you've got any other ideas for vlogs you'd like me to talk about that are to do with psychologically based issues, or parenting, or stress management, or goal setting, please feel free to just put them in the comment section so that I can have a talk about those in the coming weeks. So I hope you have a great Tuesday, and I'll talk to you again next week. Bye for now.